Today we're going to be talking about photosynthesis and cellular respiration. We're going to be looking at the picture you have that kind of looks a little bit like a smiley face. I'm going to first start by talking about photosynthesis. So if I were to break down the word photosynthesis, photo means light, synthesis means to build or to create. So the word literally means I am using light, I'm using solar energy to build or to create something. This process occurs in the organelle called the chloroplast. Chloroplasts are only found in eukaryotic plant cells. Let's look at the chloroplast a little bit closer. There is an inner membrane, an outer membrane, tiny stacks of what I like to call little pancakes called thylakoids, and then there's space around the thylakoids, empty space, and that is called the stroma. The first thing I have to give plants in order for them to survive and actually do photosynthesis is water and solar energy. The water and the solar energy are going to be used for the light-dependent reaction. Light-dependent means it needs light, it requires light to break down water and actually produce something called ATP, which is energy, and to produce something called NADPH, which is an electron carrier. An electron carrier is a fancy way of saying it is a molecule that holds on to energy until it's ready to pass that energy on to something else to use it. So whenever we break down water and use solar energy, we're creating oxygen gas as a waste, meaning we get rid of it. Plants don't need that oxygen gas when they do photosynthesis. We produce ATP and we produce that NADPH to use in the next part. The next part of the photosynthesis reaction requires carbon dioxide. It is called light independent or Calvin cycle. It is when we take carbon dioxide and the energy, the ATP and NADPH that we made during the first part, and we use it to combine them together to make a glucose molecule. Glucose has 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens all combined together. The bonds that hold all of those molecules together are where we actually store that solar energy. This process occurs in the empty space, the stroma. The equation for photosynthesis is solar energy plus 6 water plus 6 carbon dioxide equals 1 glucose and 6 oxygen. This whole process is known as a dehydration synthesis reaction. And remember, the word synthesis means to build or to create. So whenever we say photosynthesis, we are building something, we are creating something. The next process we're going to talk about is cellular respiration. Cellular respiration occurs in the organelle called the mitochondria. Mitochondria are found in both plant and animal cells. So in other words, all eukaryotic cells, such as you, contain a mitochondria and carry out this process. This also means that plants do this process. So keep that in mind. Plants can do both photosynthesis and cellular respiration. For cellular respiration, the mitochondria has a couple of different parts, so let's look at them. The first part is the inner membrane. Next is the outer membrane, and then it has an empty space in the middle called the matrix. Before I actually jump into the process of cellular respiration, though, it is important to note that the very first part of cellular respiration doesn't actually happen in the mitochondria. It happens in the cell cytoplasm. So let's pretend that the circle I've just drawn represents the cell membrane and the cell cytoplasm of a plant or an animal cell. Keep in mind the fact that not all parts of this process occur inside the mitochondria. It is an important thing to remember, and that has been asked before on tests. All right, so the first thing I have to give plants or animals in order for them to do cellular respiration is glucose, C6H12O6. The glucose will be used for the very first part called glycolysis. Remember, lysis in any part of the name means to break. So glycolysis literally means I'm breaking that glucose molecule in half. When I break glucose in half, I release something called NADH, that's an electron carrier, and I release ATP. Remember, these are just forms of energy. The next step in cellular respiration is called the Krebs cycle. Krebs cycle is where I take whatever I broke down in the first part, glycolysis, and I continue to break it down. So in other words, what I'll be doing is releasing carbon dioxide every time I break off one of those carbons and release energy. The energy will be released and stored in the form of ATP, NADH, and FADH2. Remember, NADH, FADH, again, those are electron carriers. They're just holding on to energy until I can use them a little bit later in the next step of the process. The last thing I need to give plants or animals in order for them to do cellular respiration is oxygen gas. Oxygen gas is used for the very last step of cellular respiration, called the electron transport chain. In the electron transport chain, what I am using is an enzyme called ATP synthase. Remember, if it ends in ACE, A-S-E, it's going to be an enzyme or a protein. ATP synthase is taking hydrogen ions from the electron carriers, NADH, FADH, and what it's doing is it is pumping those hydrogens across the inner membrane. As it pumps hydrogens across the inner membrane, that creates energy. This process creates about 34 or 32 ATPs of energy. That is the ultimate goal of cellular respiration. A waste product that it's also creating is water. So as you breathe in oxygen, your mitochondria is using that oxygen to produce water as a waste product. The equation for cellular respiration is C6H12O6, so glucose, plus 6 oxygen molecules equals cellular energy, and in total, the whole process creates about 36 or 38 ATP, 6 water molecules, and 6 carbon dioxide. So this is how much energy, 36, 34 ATP, that I make per molecule of glucose. When you eat a Snickers bar, for example, you're not eating just one molecule of glucose, you're eating millions of molecules of glucose. This whole process is known as a hydrolysis reaction. Remember, lysis at the end of the word means that it is a reaction that is breaking something. As we finish our conversation about photosynthesis and cellular respiration, it's important to note that the products of one are always going to be the reactants of the other. This forms a cycle between the two processes. The only thing that does not go round and round in the cycle would be, change colors, would be solar energy. So solar energy goes in, but it does not go around and round. The second thing that does not go round and round is ATP. So in other words, energy is the only thing that does not get cycled. Once it goes in as solar energy, it's going to get stored, but solar energy does not come back out as a product. ATP gets produced, but it doesn't go back in. Plants don't take our ATP in. Once ATP is used, it is lost. So keep that in mind as we talk about this process. We're going to talk more about it as we go, and we're also going to be connecting it to our past topics. Why is it important for plants to take in solar energy? Why is it important for plants and animals to make ATP?